Alright everybody, welcome back to the Science Channel. Today we're going to be setting up a very basic solar panel system. Let's get started. Okay, let's talk about the components that we're going to use. First, the most important part and the heart of the system is the solar panel right here. It is a 12 volt, 100 watt solar panel. Right here we have the battery. It's a 12 volt lead acid battery. It looks like a car battery, but actually it's a marine battery for boats. Here we have the charge controller, and here we have the 800 watt inverter. Finally, we have some various cables, a couple fuses, and the tools that we're going to use to put this together. The first step is going to be to connect the battery here to the charge controller. Let's talk about the battery for a second. This is a 12 volt DC battery. It is rated for 100 amp hours, and it's what's called a deep cycle battery, which means that it's designed to be fully discharged and then recharged multiple times without losing capacity. It also happens to have a very low discharge rate in general, which means that it can sit for months at a time in storage and not need to be charged up. Then I'm going to connect the battery to the charge controller. By the way, the wiring that I'm going to be used for this entire system, I'm going to be using 10 gauge wiring. I'm using 10 gauge wiring because it gives me a little bit of extra safety factor. 10 gauge wiring is good for 30 amps. This is going to be a 20 amp max system, so I have a little bit of room there. As far as the charge controller itself and why I'm using a 20 amp system is because this is a 20 amp charge controller. I don't want to exceed these 20 amps or else it's going to hurt my charge controller. The purpose of the charge controller itself is to regulate the voltage and the current coming from the solar panel and flowing into my battery. It's a way to protect your battery. Before we get started, let's go ahead and check the voltage of the battery real quick to make sure that it is in fact 12 volts. So I have my voltmeter here. I'm going to touch both terminals, and we can see that we have a strong 12.7 volts DC. 12 volts on these batteries is nominal. Really, you're going to have more than 12 volts, so this is fine. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and start connecting everything. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the battery to the charge controller. And one thing I forgot to mention is that for added safety, I'm going to put an inline fuse. This is a 20 amp automotive fuse, and so this again will just help to protect the electronics better. Okay, new day, new shirt. What we're going to do now is we're going to solder this inline fuse into the battery cable here to provide some extra protection. Okay, now we'll do a quick continuity test to make sure that it didn't screw up the soldering. So all we're looking for is a tone here, and there it is. So we know that the wire has continuous connection throughout it. Okay, and now that we've soldered the inline fuse into the cable, we're going to crimp these fork connectors into the cables, which will then go into the charge controller. And as we continue to prepare our wiring, this wire is going to go from the inverter to the battery. So one end is going to have this terminal post for the battery, and another this terminal post for the inverter. And now we'll continue to attach the proper connector to each cable until I'm finished. Alright, so we got all the cables made, we're ready to hook everything up. Let me explain how the system is going to work. First, sunlight is going to hit the solar panel here. Through this cabling right here, and by the way, I'll also be installing a 20 amp fuse here to the positive line just for added protection and safety. The power will flow through here to the charge controller. The charge controller is really the heart of the operation. It flows through here and then through these cables right here, it will be connected to the battery. Remember again, the purpose of the charge controller is to regulate the voltage in the current to the battery so as not to damage the battery. At this point, we do have a fully functioning system. The only problem is that you would have to have a 12 volt DC appliance that you want to run because that's what this battery is going to output. To make this setup even more functional, what we can do is we can add this inverter. So we use these cables here to connect the inverter to the battery as well. And this inverter will output 110 volts AC, which is what your household outlets use. So with this inverter, you could run anything that you would run from a normal house outlet. The only thing is that you're limited to 800 watts, and so at 110 volts, that's going to be about 7 amps, which is a good amount of current. It'll run most things, but there is a limit. Okay, so with that explanation out of the way, let's go ahead and hook everything up, see if it works. Okay, great. So we have everything set up now. It's a little bit messy with the wires. Part of the reason is because I got extra long wires so I could put these components far away from each other. But we can tell that everything's working. So first of all, we have the readout from the charge controller. We can see a couple things here. We can see the battery is reading 12.7 volts, and that's fine. We can see the temperature, 25°C in the room, we're indoors. And then this is interesting. This PV is for photovoltaic. That's showing the voltage coming from the solar panel. It's reading 7.9 or 8 right now, just with these lights on. So it should be outputting 12 volts, and it would be if it were outside in the sun. But what's interesting is that we're still getting a charge coming from just this indoor light. And I'll show you that if I turn the lights off, this will go to 0. So right now you see it's charging at 8.2 volts. If I turn this light off, watch it go down to 0. I'll turn it back on. And here I am again, charging at 8.3, which is not sufficient to charge the battery, but it's showing that the system is working and that I am getting some power coming off this solar panel. Now there's one more component that we need to test. It's the inverter, of course. So right now you can see that's off. There's no on light here. So I'm gonna switch it on from the back. Okay, green means it's ready to go. I have a corded drill here. It's not working. Let's see if we can get it to work. Moment of truth. Perfect. And so of course, right now, this inverter is just working because the battery already had charge. But I showed a second ago that the solar panel was working to charge the battery, or would work in the sunlight. So I think we can be convinced now that the system's working. Okay, so we took this whole contraption outside. It's a big tangle of messes. It's pretty dark right now and overcast, so it's not the best time to test this solar panel, but I just want to see if it would work. And so, if we look at the charge controller here, you can see PV right here, the solar panel is outputting 12.2 volts, which is really cool. So it's not putting out too much current probably. It's probably not charging the battery too well, but it is working even in a dark and overcast evening.
Well, there you have it. Free energy straight from the sun via the magic of solar panels. Now, of course, what we built is the most basic solar panel system that you can have. There's only one panel, there's only one battery, but hopefully you can see that scaling things up is just a matter of adding more components and wiring them together. Your only concern would be to make sure that your electronics, your cables, your fuses, your batteries can handle the increased load. But aside from that, it's pretty simple. And I plan to do just that. So now that I've got everything figured out, it's pretty trivial to add more pieces. I think I'm gonna add a few more panels. I'll mount them somewhere, and if I have the time, I'll make another video about that as well. And with that being said, building our simple solar panel system is our achievement for the day. So thanks for watching. See you next time.